All right, we're in chapter 4. We're in that part where we're doing the fun stuff. We're inserting images into our web pages and not talking about all the technical, legal mumbo jumbo, all that other stuff. But before we do that, you need to understand what is the difference between an essential and non-essential image. An essential image is one that works to your advantage for the website, such as a logo, product images, staff pictures, or other images that you can insert using the HTML code. A non-essential image is something that isn't necessarily required for the website to work or people to use it. For example, decorations, backgrounds, decorative bullets, or anything that isn't really necessary for the web page to load. You can use these via CSS. We'll get to that in chapter 11 and 12. Alright, the fun stuff, the image tag or IMG tag. In order to use the image tag, a few things are required. First thing is the SRC or the source attribute. This is basically telling the browser where the image is located. We'll talk about the relative and absolute file locations in just a minute. The alt or alternative text. This is required because if the image can't be loaded or can't be found, then the alternative text is displayed in its place. We'll get to the reason for this in just a minute. The width and height attributes are optional. They specify the display size, or basically how big the image should be. And note that the image tag can be a void tag. If you like closing your tags, I highly recommend it. It is not required, but it makes for good practice so someone doesn't come along and try to close it for you and put a /img. First thing is the SRC or source. In this case, we are going to be using absolute and relative locations. The difference between these two is that the absolute refers to the root document or an external site. For example, /assets/image/logo.png, or for the second one, http :/ for the protocol, example.com/assets/images/logo.png. This basically means that from the root directory or the root folder, the browser is going to start looking there and go up the folder chain to find the image based on the file location you put in. A relative location is one that refers to the local folder or a folder that is relative, hence the name, to the file's location. Example, if the image is in the same location as the file that's trying to load it, you could just say logo.png. If it's inside of an images folder, you would call images/logo.png. If it's outside of the current folder and inside the images folder, you would use /images/logo.png. We'll cover the definition of these in just a minute. But this thing right here, the slash, is also called a delimiter. What that means is that it's actually going to be separating the items between folder 1 and folder 2. What does that mean? Let's talk about it. In the web page or website example.com, this is also known as the root directory, again where everything starts to be loaded for this website. Inside that folder we have a folder called assets. Inside that folder we have a folder called images. Inside that folder we have of course this icon or this image of bulb.png. What this means is that if we are to load the absolute path, it means that we're starting with slash for the root directory, assets/images/bulb.png. That basically means that every time we have a slash, that delimiter is telling us we are separating the name itself of the folder or the location and we're going into a different folder. Why is there no file name or folder name for the root directory? Well, that first delimiter is telling us we're starting at the root directory. What happens if you forget the first slash? Well, that's known as a relative path. We'll get to that in just a minute. With the relative path, it means that from the current location, we're going to be looking inside the assets folder, into the images folder, and finding the bulb.png. That means that from the root directory, if we are to use this, we are able to perfectly find the bulb. If we're inside any of these other folders, it's going to be looking for the assets folder inside any of the other ones, which can be a bit confusing. I'll explain that in just a minute. So we start with the root directory, we go into the assets folder, we go into the images folder, we find the bulb. If we start with the assets directory, we just put in images/bulb. If we start with images, all we do is say bulb because the bulb is inside the images folder. This may not make sense to some of you, but I promise you once you have some practice with it and examples, it'll become easier along the way. Let's take a look what it's like backing out of a folder. So, if your folder or your file is inside the About folder and we need to find the bulb image, that means that we are actually going to have the relative path of ... That means that we're backing out of the current folder and going into a new one. In this case, we're going out of About into Assets, Images, and finding the bulb. If you just want to use the absolute path and no dots, that means that we're starting from the root directory. Hey look, root directory. Going into the assets, the images, and finding the bulb. So again, the delimiters allow you to separate the folders. The ... allows you to go up one folder in the file directory tree. Every time you have a ... that means you're going up one folder and you're going back out of it. Okay. For the alternative text, this shows in case the image can't be loaded or found. This should be relatively descriptive about what the image is about. Nothing like image 1, image 2, or right image, or long image, or image of Joe. You want something that is descriptive, that is to the image, so if the image can't be loaded, people know what the image should be. In text-based browsers, such as this example on the far right, images can't be loaded because it's not text. So in this case, the descriptive text or the alternative text is shown instead. You can see as an example in the code, I've actually misspelled canary, that was intended, so that the alternative text shows in the browser. Because if, well, the image can't be loaded, it needs something to show. Otherwise, it doesn't have anything to show and it doesn't know what to do. If you are going to use the width and height attributes, which again, they are optional, please keep in mind of scaling and proportions. If you only specify one or the other, the good thing is the browser will scale with it. But if you specify both, the browser will specifically state what that size will be for the image. The default for this image is roughly a width of 300, a height of 200. If we modify that a bit to the extreme, you can see on the left the bird is pretty flat. On the right, the bird is pretty tall, because we flipped the width and the height just as an example to show you what it's like if you don't scale or proportionally know the numbers for your image. Again, if you just leave one of the width or the height empty, or you don't specify it, then the browser will automatically scale it based on the one value you did provide. In this case, we have a width of 100, which means that it's up to the browser to determine what the height of the image should be. And last but not least, if you're going to use HTML styling in images, please do not. Once we get into CSS, we'll learn how to style images appropriately. Mainly because in HTML5, depreciated tags in images have been used. If you are to use things in HTML such as align, border, or H space or V space, please get that out of your system, make that habit stop, and once we get to CSS, you'll learn how to use those things appropriately with floating, borders, and paddings and margin. Okay, that is it for this section. If you have any questions about images, you can't get your images to load, you can't learn where the location of an image is in relation to your folder, please send me an email with your images and files and folders so I can give you a better example than just a standard response. Or hit me up on Twitter and I'll hopefully get a walkthrough with you of your exact problem and get back to you the best I can.